I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. I wanted a break from everything: work, people, noise, and I had chosen a remote spot in the mountains that few people ever visited. The area was known for its rugged terrain, dense forests, and wild rivers, and that was exactly why I wanted it. I packed my backpack carefully, making sure I had essentials: a tent, sleeping bag, enough food and water for a few days, a first aid kit, a small stove, and some tools. I even brought a compass and a map, though I told myself I probably wouldn't need them. I liked the idea of being completely on my own, surrounded by nature, facing nothing but the elements. I drove to the trailhead early in the morning, the sun barely lighting the sky. The air was crisp and smelled like pine and wet earth. As I unloaded my gear and strapped my backpack on, I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with something else: nervousness I didn't fully recognize. There was a quiet in the mountains that you don't find anywhere else, a silence so complete that it made your own heartbeat sound loud. I started walking along the narrow trail, and immediately the sounds of civilization disappeared. No cars, no planes, no voices, just the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and twigs. The first few hours passed quickly. I followed the trail carefully, noting landmarks and using my compass to check my direction. The forest was dense, and sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy. Birds chirped occasionally, and I saw a few small animals dart between trees. The isolation was beautiful, but I couldn't shake a small sense of unease. I told myself it was just the unfamiliarity, the fact that I was completely alone. By midday, I reached a small clearing near a stream. The water was clear and cold, and I filled my bottle before taking a break. I sat on a flat rock, ate a small lunch of bread and cheese, and watched the sunlight glinting off the water. I felt a moment of calm, thinking this was exactly what I had wanted: peace, silence, solitude. I rested for an hour, enjoying the simple satisfaction of being outdoors, before continuing deeper into the forest. The trail became less defined as I climbed higher. The terrain was steeper, and loose rocks made my footing uncertain. I had to pause frequently, catching my breath and watching where I stepped. Eventually, I reached a point where the path disappeared entirely. I consulted my map and compass, trying to find a logical route. I realized I would have to leave the trail and navigate through unmarked terrain to reach a good campsite before nightfall. I hesitated for a moment, thinking about turning back, but the sense of adventure pushed me forward. I marked a spot in my mind where I could return if needed and began moving cautiously. The forest thickened, branches scraping my arms, roots tripping me. The sunlight dimmed under the dense canopy, and the temperature dropped. I reached a ridge that offered a view of the valley below, but the wind made me shiver. I found a small flat area surrounded by rocks and decided it might be a decent spot to set up camp. I cleared the ground of leaves and sticks and pitched my tent. By now, the sun was low in the sky, and shadows stretched long and dark across the forest floor. I lit a small stove to cook dinner, the warm smell of food mixing with the earthy scent of pine. As I ate, I felt the first real touch of fear. Not of anything in particular, but the realization of how isolated I truly was. There was no one for miles. No one would hear me if something went wrong. I reminded myself to stay calm, to rely on my skills and preparation. After cleaning up, I secured my food in a backpack outside the tent, hung from a tree branch as best as I could. Bears were rare, but I didn't want to take any chances. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped it tightly around me, and tried to sleep. The night was long and unsettling. I woke several times, convinced I heard branches snapping, twigs breaking, footsteps. Every rustle made my heart jump. I told myself it was just animals, maybe deer or raccoons, but there was a different sound, something heavier, deliberate. I listened for long minutes, frozen, straining my ears. It never came close, never repeated, but I lay awake for hours imagining every worst-case scenario. I eventually fell into a light, uneasy sleep, only to wake to the sound of distant, low growls echoing through the valley. My mind raced. Bears were possible, but they usually avoided humans. Could it be a mountain lion? Or a wild dog? My pulse was high as I quietly unzipped the tent and peered outside. The moonlight cast silver shadows over the trees, but I saw nothing. The next morning, I packed carefully, keeping an eye out for tracks or signs of wildlife. I noticed several large paw prints near the stream, fresh and deep, and I realized the growls had not been imagined. I was in territory with predators, and I felt a surge of urgency to move. I followed a small game trail downhill, hoping it would lead to a larger path or river I could use as a reference point. Hours passed. I kept checking my map and compass, trying to stay oriented, but the forest was confusing. Every tree looked the same, every ridge seemed familiar. My confidence dwindled. By late afternoon, I realized I was lost. The sun was already low, and I had no idea which direction would take me back to the trailhead. My food was running low, and I had only enough water for a day. Panic threatened to take over, but I forced myself to breathe and think logically. I remembered a stream I had seen on the map that ran north-south. If I could find it, I could follow it downstream to a trail or road. I searched desperately, and eventually, I heard the sound of flowing water. Relief hit me, but I didn't let myself relax. The stream was narrow and swift. I followed its bank carefully, slipping over wet rocks and pushing through dense brush. Every step was exhausting, my legs aching, my hands scratched from branches. By dusk, I realized the forest around me was even darker than before. Shadows pooled between trees, and the sounds of wildlife intensified. An owl hooting nearby, a fox barking, the occasional rustle of something larger moving in the brush. My anxiety grew. I was aware that at any moment, a predator could appear. I kept my knife ready, a piece of rope in hand, and made slow, deliberate movements. Night came faster than I expected. I couldn't see the sky through the thick canopy, and my headlamp was the only source of light. I knew I couldn't keep moving safely in total darkness, but the thought of stopping terrified me. I found a small, slightly elevated area near the stream and cleared a tiny space for my sleeping bag. I decided to rest, knowing that exhaustion would compromise my judgment if I kept going. I stayed alert all night, my ears straining for any unusual sounds. Every snap of a twig made me tense. I didn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time, waking repeatedly to scan the darkness. Morning came as a gray, misty light filtered through the trees. I felt stiff and sore, my stomach grumbling from lack of proper food. I ate what little I had left and filled my bottle from the stream. Then I resumed following the water. Hours passed. I slipped multiple times, my boots muddy, hands scratched and bleeding slightly. The terrain was uneven, and I had to crawl under fallen trees, balance over logs, and push through thick underbrush. Despite my exhaustion, I pressed on. Around midday, I noticed something strange. The stream curved in a way I didn't remember from the map, and the banks became marshy. The water level was higher, and I had to find a safe way to cross. I found a fallen tree acting as a natural bridge and crossed slowly, keeping my balance. The farther I went, the more signs of human presence I found. An old trail marker, a rusted can, footprints that didn't match any wild animal. Relief surged through me. I was near a trail. I could make it back. Finally, as the sun was dropping toward the horizon, I stumbled onto a well-worn dirt path. I could see tire tracks and even a small sign indicating a trailhead not far ahead. I ran, my adrenaline pushing me past exhaustion. The forest began to open, the trees thinning, and I could see the outline of a road in the distance. By the time I reached it, I was covered in mud and scratches, bleeding in small places, trembling from fatigue and relief. I waved at a passing car, and the driver stopped immediately. I explained I had been lost, and they offered water and a ride back to the nearest ranger station. At the ranger station, I sat quietly, drinking water, feeling the tension in my body slowly release. They checked my condition, noted the area where I had been, and warned me about the dangers of the terrain I had chosen. I felt a mix of shame and gratitude. Shame for underestimating the wilderness and gratitude for surviving without serious injury. I realized how close I had come to something much worse. By the time I finally made it home, I was exhausted but alive. I cleaned my scratches, washed the mud from my clothes, and sat down with a hot shower and food that wasn't dried or packaged. I reflected on the trip, recognizing that the forest had not been a fairy tale. It had been raw and real, full of risks and lessons. I had faced fear, isolation, and danger, and I had survived because of preparation, awareness, and a willingness to stay calm under pressure. After that experience, I didn't stop camping, but I respected the wilderness in a new way. I made stricter plans, never underestimated my surroundings, and always left a clear route for emergencies. Every time I returned to nature, I remembered that trip. Not the thrill, not the scenery, but the raw, terrifying lesson that being alone in the wild is not an adventure until you understand the real stakes. I slept that night with a deep sense of relief, knowing that my caution, patience, and persistence had carried me back to safety. It stayed with me for years, a memory of fear turned into clarity. I never took solitude lightly again, and I always respected the forest, the rivers, and the mountains as places that could be beautiful, but also unforgiving if you let your guard down. That trip was a reminder that survival is rarely dramatic in the movies. It is patient, careful, and relentless attention to the small details that makes the difference between getting lost and getting home. I had been planning the trip for months. I wanted to get away from the city, from the noise, from the constant pressure of work and life. My plan was simple: a solo camping trip deep in the forest, far from any roads or towns. I packed carefully, making sure I had all the essentials: a large backpack with food, water, a tent, a sleeping bag, extra clothes, a first aid kit, a small stove, and a few tools. I double-checked my maps and compass and told myself I was ready for anything. The area I picked was known for its remote trails and dense woods. I wanted isolation, and I got exactly that. I started my hike early in the morning, just as the sun was rising. The air was crisp, and the forest smelled fresh. I followed a narrow trail at first, enjoying the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves under my boots. The forest felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced in the city. I carried my pack on my shoulders, heavier than I expected, but the effort was worth it. I reached a clearing in the late morning, where sunlight fell in patches through the trees. It was the perfect spot for a first short break. I drank some water, ate a small snack, and studied my map. I marked where I was and planned the next leg of my hike. By noon, I had gone deeper into the forest. The trail became less clear, overgrown with bushes and fallen branches. I kept going, but a part of me started feeling uneasy. The forest was quiet now, too quiet. The sounds of wildlife seemed to fade. I thought I was just imagining it, blaming my mind for overreacting, but the sense of isolation began pressing on me. I stopped occasionally to check the map, but after a while, I realized I couldn't tell exactly where I was. The trail I had been following had disappeared entirely. I hadn't noticed, but the path had been gradually disappearing under years of neglect and fallen trees. I looked around. All I could see was dense forest in every direction, trees thick and high, shadows stretching across the forest floor. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. The trees all looked alike, the undergrowth was thick, and I started to panic slightly. My heart was beating faster than usual. I reminded myself to stay calm. Panicking would do no good. I sat down on a fallen log, breathing heavily, trying to think clearly. I had water, some food, and a flashlight. I wasn't in immediate danger, but I knew I needed to find a safe place to set up camp. I couldn't keep wandering in circles. I walked slowly, paying attention to any landmarks. An oddly shaped tree, a large rock, a small stream. I needed something to guide me. Hours passed, and the sun began to lower. I realized I had been walking for much longer than I thought. My legs were tired, my back ached from the heavy backpack, and I had not yet found a safe place to camp. The thought of spending the night in the middle of the forest, without shelter, began to terrify me. I wasn't used to the wilderness in this way. Finally, I spotted a small clearing with a flat area that seemed suitable for pitching my tent. It was surrounded by trees on 3 sides, offering some protection from the wind. I set up my tent quickly, my hands shaking from fatigue and tension. I gathered some dry branches and leaves to start a small fire. It was difficult because the wood was damp from earlier rain, but I managed after some effort. The fire gave me warmth and some comfort. The light pushed back the shadows, but I could still feel the darkness pressing against the edges of the clearing. As night fell, the forest became a different place. Sounds I hadn't noticed during the day, branches snapping, leaves rustling, distant calls of animals, became louder and more menacing. Every small noise made me jump. I checked my surroundings constantly, flashlight in hand. My imagination started playing tricks on me, and every shadow looked like someone or something was moving out there. I reminded myself it was just wildlife, that there was no one else around, but the feeling of being watched was impossible to ignore. I tried to sleep, but exhaustion made it difficult to relax. Every few minutes I would wake up, listening for any unusual sound. I realized that I had underestimated the isolation. The forest was alive at night, and it was not friendly to humans. I stayed awake for most of the night, sitting by the fire, checking my supplies, planning what I would do at first light. Morning came slowly. I felt drained but relieved to see daylight. I knew I had to try to find my way back to civilization before my supplies ran low. I packed up the tent and fire remnants, careful not to leave any traces, and began walking in what I hoped was the right direction. I tried to stay oriented, using the sun, the direction of the stream, and landmarks I remembered. But the forest had a way of confusing even the most careful navigator. Hours passed with little progress. My water supply was dwindling, and my stomach ached from limited food. I found small berries and a stream with fresh water, but I knew I couldn't rely on these alone. My legs were sore, my feet blistered, and the sun was hot, making each step more exhausting. My mind started to play tricks on me again. I thought I saw movement in the trees, shadows that weren't there, the sound of voices that didn't exist. I forced myself to stay focused on the goal, find a way out. By late afternoon, I spotted a faint trail. It was narrow and overgrown, but it looked like it might lead somewhere. My heart leaped with hope. I followed it carefully, moving slowly to avoid injuries. The trail was uneven, full of roots and fallen branches, and it took all my energy to keep going. My mind kept telling me to stop, to rest, but I knew I couldn't afford to stop. Nightfall was approaching again. Finally, as the sun dipped low, I saw signs of human presence. An old fence, a discarded can, a distant road. Relief flooded me. I picked up my pace, stumbling over roots and rocks, ignoring my pain. The forest seemed less threatening as I moved toward civilization, but my exhaustion made every step a challenge. I could hear cars in the distance, a sound I had not realized I would miss so much. I emerged from the forest onto a dirt road just as night fell. The first car that passed me stopped when the driver saw me. I explained where I had come from, barely able to speak, and they offered me water, food, and a ride to the nearest town. The feeling of being safe again, of being seen by another human, was overwhelming. I realized just how dangerous the forest had been and how vulnerable I had been alone. Back in town, at a small inn, I finally allowed myself to rest. I cleaned up, ate a proper meal, and slept deeply for the first time in 2 nights. I knew I had survived something serious. The experience left me with a deep respect for nature and an understanding of my own limits. I had underestimated how quickly things could become dangerous in the wilderness, even when I thought I was prepared. I also realized that survival depended not just on skills and gear, but on calm thinking, careful planning, and respect for the environment. In the days that followed, I recovered physically and mentally. I still loved the forest, but I knew I would never underestimate it again. I started learning more about navigation, survival techniques, and how to prepare for emergencies. The experience stayed with me, shaping the way I approached nature, travel, and risk. It had been terrifying, exhausting, and humbling, but I survived, and I had come out stronger, wiser, and more careful. I understood that nature could be unforgiving, but it could also teach the most valuable lessons if you paid attention. I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. I wanted to be alone in the wilderness, away from people, phones, and noise. The forest I chose was remote, a few hours' drive from the nearest town. It wasn't a national park or a popular hiking spot. It was just a stretch of forest with old logging roads and abandoned trails. I packed my car carefully. A tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, water, a first aid kit, a small stove, a flashlight with extra batteries, and a few survival items I thought I might need. I left my route with a friend, just in case something happened. The drive itself was quiet, almost too quiet. I passed small hills and fields, then narrow roads surrounded by tall pine and oak trees. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the road. There were no other cars, no people, no houses. Felt good, like I was leaving the world behind. Eventually, I reached the spot I had picked, a small clearing along an old dirt track. It was perfect. Flat ground, surrounded by dense forest, a small creek running nearby, and enough space for my tent. I started setting up my camp as the sun was dropping. The forest smelled of pine, damp earth, and leaves. I built a small fire pit with stones I found nearby, stacked some dry wood, and laid out my tent. The process took longer than I expected, but it was satisfying. By the time I finished, the sky was orange and pink, the sun almost gone. I cooked a small dinner on the stove, ate slowly, and washed my utensils in the creek. The sound of running water was calming. I felt peaceful, completely alone but safe, or so I thought. Night came quickly. I decided to sit near the fire for a while, listening to the forest. There were the usual sounds: crickets, rustling leaves, and the occasional distant bird. Then I heard something else, a snapping branch far away, too deliberate to be random. My stomach tightened. I thought maybe it was a deer or some small animal, so I tried not to worry. But then I heard it again, closer this time, soft and deliberate. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath, and the sound stopped. I went inside my tent early, zipped it tightly, and lay down. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. The night was cold, the tent walls pressing in, the fire reduced to a few glowing embers. Then I heard something right outside, the faintest shuffle, like someone walking slowly, carefully, around the edge of my camp. My heart started pounding. I stayed still, listening, trying to stay calm. I wasn't imagining it. Whoever or whatever it was, they were moving around my tent. I had packed a small pocket knife, but it didn't feel enough. I thought about my car, parked a few 100 feet away, and the idea of running to it crossed my mind, but I was frozen by fear. I stayed in the tent all night, barely sleeping, listening to noises outside. Branches breaking, footsteps, the faint scraping of something against a tree. The fire had burned out, leaving me in almost total darkness. Morning came slowly. I unzipped the tent carefully, expecting to see someone standing there, but the clearing was empty. The forest looked normal in daylight, calm, peaceful. I told myself I had just imagined the noises. I ate breakfast slowly, packed some of my things, but I couldn't leave entirely. I wanted to explore the area to convince myself I was safe. I followed a narrow trail along the creek, my senses alert. Every sound made me jump. After a while, I saw signs of wildlife. Footprints, a few claw marks on trees, and broken branches. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. A set of human footprints, fresh, leading along the trail. They weren't far behind mine, like someone had been following me. I froze. I debated whether to turn back immediately, but I felt trapped. The trail led to a ridge with a view of the valley below. I kept walking slowly, my eyes scanning the trees. By the time I reached the ridge, I could see my car in the distance. Relief mixed with fear. Someone had been near my camp last night, maybe watching me, but they weren't there now. I decided to move fast but quietly back toward the car. The forest seemed different now, darker somehow, even in daylight. Every shadow, every sound felt like a threat. As I walked, I noticed more signs. Broken twigs, flattened grass, a half-hidden trail off to the side. Whoever had been there was still nearby. I picked up a long branch as a makeshift weapon. My heart was racing. I walked quickly but carefully, trying to make as little noise as possible. Then I heard a voice, or something like a voice, muffled, low, coming from the trees to my left. It wasn't shouting, just words I couldn't make out. My mind screamed at me to run, but I moved slowly, keeping the branch ready. I could see movement in the trees, subtle shadows shifting. Someone was following me, and I had no idea if they were armed, dangerous, or how far away they were. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My car was on an incline, so I had to be careful not to roll backward, but I didn't care. I put it in drive and slowly drove down the dirt track, my eyes scanning the forest constantly. I didn't see anyone, but I knew I had been followed. I reached a main road after about 20 minutes, still tense, still shaking. I stopped at the first gas station I saw, called my friend, and told them what happened. They said to report it to the local police, which I did. They took a statement and said they would send someone to check the area. They warned me that sometimes isolated areas attracted people who did strange things, and that I had been lucky nothing worse happened. The rest of the day, I stayed in town, feeling the tension slowly leave me. I realized how close I had come to real danger. I had gone out to find peace in nature, but someone had been there, silent, patient, and watching. I didn't sleep well that night, thinking about what could have happened if I had left the tent at the wrong moment or walked into the woods again. A few weeks later, I returned to the forest, this time with a small group and police guidance. They found evidence of a person who had been living in the woods nearby, leaving traps, hidden spots, and following people who wandered in. Nothing violent had happened to me, but it could have. The authorities removed the person from the area. I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I realized how unprepared I had been, how close I had been to danger. After that, I went camping again, but never alone in remote areas. I learned to respect the unpredictability of people as much as the unpredictability of nature. The forest was beautiful, peaceful, and calming, but only when shared with caution, preparation, and awareness. The memory of that night never left me. The sound of footsteps outside my tent, the feeling of being watched, the slow, tense walk back to my car. I had survived, but I knew it had been a close call. That experience changed how I approached the outdoors forever. From then on, I always told people my route, checked in regularly, and made sure I wasn't isolated in remote areas. Nature had its dangers, but people did too. I never forgot the feeling of the dark forest, the quiet sounds that weren't animals, the fear that someone was right there, just out of sight. I survived that trip, and it made me stronger, more careful, and more aware. I never took my safety for granted again, and every time I look at a map or plan a solo trip, I remember that night. The night I realized that the woods are not just quiet and beautiful. They can be frighteningly alive with people you cannot see. I had planned this trip for weeks. I wanted to escape the city, the noise, and the people, and just spend some time alone in the woods. I wasn't a seasoned camper, but I knew the basics: how to pitch a tent, how to start a fire, how to cook simple meals over a small stove, and the importance of having a first aid kit. I had checked the weather forecast before leaving. It was supposed to be dry, maybe a little cool at night, perfect for camping. I loaded my backpack carefully, making sure I had extra clothes, food, water, a flashlight with spare batteries, a knife, a map, and a compass. I didn't bring any electronics except my phone, mostly for emergencies, though I told myself I would not rely on it too much. I arrived at the trailhead late in the morning. The parking lot was nearly empty, a few cars scattered here and there. I strapped on my backpack and began walking. The trail was narrow at first, overgrown in places, with roots and rocks making my footing tricky. The forest was dense, with tall pines and oaks forming a roof overhead. Light filtered through in golden patches, and the smell of damp earth and pine filled the air. At first, everything felt calm, almost peaceful. I walked slowly, enjoying the sound of leaves crunching under my boots and birds calling from high branches. As the afternoon passed, the trail started to climb. My legs burned from the incline, but the sight of a small clearing ahead pushed me forward. I reached a ridge that overlooked a valley below. The view was stunning. Rolling hills, scattered trees, and a distant river glinting in the sun. I paused to take a sip of water and catch my breath. I looked at my map and decided I would camp somewhere in the valley, near the river, where I could have water easily and maybe a flat area for my tent. The descent was slow. Loose rocks made me cautious, and I kept my balance by gripping my walking stick firmly. By the time I reached the bottom of the valley, it was late afternoon. I found a flat area surrounded by a cluster of trees, not too far from the riverbank but high enough to avoid any chance of flooding. The ground was soft, covered with pine needles, and free of large rocks, perfect for my tent. I set my backpack down and started assembling the tent. I worked carefully, making sure the stakes were secure and the fabric taut. Once the tent was up, I laid out my sleeping bag, checked my supplies, and then gathered firewood. The sun was starting to dip behind the hills when I finally managed to get a fire going. I used small twigs at first, then added larger pieces of wood as the flames grew. I cooked a simple dinner, instant noodles with some canned vegetables, and ate slowly, listening to the sounds of the forest. Everything seemed normal. Birds were settling for the night, small animals rustled through the undergrowth, and the wind whispered through the trees. I told myself I had done everything right. I had a safe site, water nearby, enough food, a fire, and basic safety gear. Night fell quickly. The fire crackled and cast shadows on the surrounding trees. I stayed close to it, feeling the warmth against the sudden chill of the evening. I double-checked my surroundings, scanning for movement, noting the paths animals might take, and ensuring my firewood pile was within reach. The forest had changed. The sounds were different now. More insect noises, the distant howl of a coyote, and the occasional snap of a branch. It was normal, I reminded myself. Animals were nocturnal. This was their time. Around 10 o'clock, I felt tired and decided to get into my tent. I put my flashlight on low, ate a small snack, and filled my water bottle. I zipped the tent, making sure it was secure, and turned off the flashlight. The darkness inside the tent was complete, heavy, and almost suffocating. I lay on my back, listening to the night outside. The fire was still burning low a few meters away, and the occasional gust of wind made the trees creak. I don't know exactly when I first heard it. A sound, faint at first, like a footstep on dry leaves. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear. There it was again, soft, deliberate, slow. My first thought was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the steps didn't match. They were heavier, more careful, like someone walking quietly on purpose. My heart started to beat faster. I grabbed my knife from beside my sleeping bag, gripping it tightly, and whispered to myself that it was probably nothing. The steps circled around my tent. I could hear them pause, rustle through branches, then move again. The fire outside flickered, and shadows danced across the trees. I considered leaving, but my backpack and supplies were a few meters away, and I was not willing to risk stepping out blindly into whoever, or whatever, was moving around. I lay still, pretending to be asleep, hoping the movement would stop. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. Not fast or panicked, but steady, quiet, and close. Too close. My heart jumped into my throat. I thought about my options. The nearest road was a few miles away, through uneven terrain and dense forest. Running blindly would almost certainly make me stumble or fall. Staying in the tent was dangerous too, but I had at least some cover. I clutched my knife tighter and waited, barely daring to breathe. The breathing stopped. I waited, counting minutes in my head. Then I heard the faint scraping of something dragging on the ground, like a bag or branch. My mind raced. Whoever it was could have been scouting me, waiting for me to show myself. I remembered my map and my compass, thinking about escape routes, anything that could get me to safety. I realized the fire was dying. I needed light and warmth. If I left the tent to rekindle it, I would be exposed. If I stayed, I might not have enough fire to see and defend myself if it came closer. I decided to risk it. Slowly, Silently, I unzipped the tent just enough to slip my head out. The night was black, and the forest seemed alive with shadows. I moved inch by inch toward the fire, keeping low. My foot slipped on the damp ground, and a small twig snapped loudly. Immediately, I heard a sharp sound, something breaking from the underbrush, and then silence. My pulse was pounding. I froze, trying to listen. The fire was almost out, its embers smoldering. I grabbed a couple of large logs, shoved them into the embers, and used my lighter to spark a flame. Caught slowly, then grew, casting light across the clearing. The shadows revealed nothing. No figures, no movement, just trees, rocks, and the faint outline of my backpack. I stayed by the fire for what felt like hours, keeping my knife in hand, scanning the darkness. Every crackle, every wind gust made me flinch. Eventually, exhaustion won. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, sitting upright, facing the fire, and tried to rest. The forest was quiet now, but I didn't dare close my eyes fully. Morning came slowly. The first light filtered through the trees, and with it came a sense of relief. Everything from the night was visible now. I could see footprints around my tent. Large, heavy prints that didn't match any animal I knew. They were human, and they circled my tent, but had not come closer. The fire had scared them off, or they had waited until it was safe to leave. I didn't stick around to find out. I packed my tent and supplies quickly, making sure I left nothing behind that could weigh me down. Every sound made me tense. Every shadow in the trees made me jump, but I kept moving toward the trailhead. I stayed near the path, avoiding dense underbrush, and kept a constant eye on my surroundings. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Took me the better part of the day to get back to my car. My legs were sore, my body stiff, but I didn't care. When I finally reached the parking lot, empty and quiet, I collapsed into the driver's seat. I sat there for a long time, heart still racing, trying to process what had happened. I realized how lucky I had been, alone in the forest with someone following me, and I had survived. I also realized I had learned important lessons. Always be aware of surroundings. Never underestimate the forest. Always have a fire ready, and trust instincts. Later, after returning home, I reported the incident to the local ranger station. They told me that sometimes people camp illegally in the forest and watch other campers, either out of curiosity or with worse intentions. They advised me to always check in with rangers, to camp in designated areas when alone, and to carry a whistle or other loud alarm. It was sobering, but I knew I would never forget that night. The fear, the adrenaline, and the relief were imprinted in my memory. That trip changed how I saw the woods. I still loved camping, still loved the quiet and the solitude, but I was no longer naive. I understood that the forest was beautiful, but it could also be dangerous in ways that weren't obvious. After that night, I always made sure to be prepared, to watch my surroundings, and to respect the fact that I was a guest there, not the master. And though I returned to the woods many times after that, I never again felt entirely alone. The memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder that vigilance can be the difference between a safe adventure and a nightmare. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for months. The city felt suffocating, and the endless noise, the crowded streets, and the constant lights made me crave a place where I could be alone with nature. I packed my backpack carefully, making sure I had all the essentials. A tent, sleeping bag, matches, a small stove, food for 3 days, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and plenty of water. I wanted to do this right. I left on a Friday morning, taking the highway that led out of the city into the mountains. The further I drove, the quieter it became. Trees started crowding the sides of the road, and the air felt cleaner, almost sharp with the smell of pine. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was high in the sky. I parked my car and double-checked my gear. The trail I planned to hike was not heavily trafficked, which was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to be around other people. I wanted to feel completely immersed in the wilderness. The first part of the trail was easy. The path was clear, with dirt packed down from years of footsteps. Birds chirped overhead, and every now and then, a squirrel would dart across the trail, stopping briefly to stare at me before disappearing into the underbrush. I felt a thrill of freedom walking through the forest, the stress of the city already melting away. After a couple of hours, the trail began to rise steeply. My legs burned, but the view opened up gradually, revealing glimpses of a valley below, a river snaking through it. I paused at a rock outcrop, taking in the scenery, breathing in the crisp air. I felt small but alive in a way I hadn't in months. I ate a quick lunch, some sandwiches and an apple, and drank water from my bottle. I could hear the river rushing below, a constant, calming sound. I decided I'd camp somewhere near the river for the night, thinking it would be peaceful and I could fall asleep to the sound of flowing water. I continued along the trail, scanning the area for a good spot. Eventually, I found a small clearing about 100 meters from the river. It was flat and dry, surrounded by trees that would shelter me from the wind. Perfect. I set up my tent, driving the stakes carefully into the ground, making sure the rain flap was tight, even though the forecast said clear skies. I organized my gear inside the tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and then started a small fire nearby, careful not to leave it unattended. I cooked a simple dinner, pasta with canned sauce, and ate while watching the sun dip below the mountain ridges. The sky turned colors I didn't know names for. Deep oranges, fading purples, the first stars blinking awake. After cleaning up, I extinguished the fire thoroughly, leaving only a small, contained glow in case I needed it. I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds. Everything felt alive. The rustling leaves, distant calls of nocturnal birds, the river flowing steadily. I drifted into sleep feeling content and alone with the wilderness. But in the middle of the night, I woke suddenly. My stomach tightened and my heart was pounding, though I couldn't immediately tell why. First, I thought it was a bad dream. Then I heard it. A low, continuous rustling coming from the trees near my tent. It wasn't the wind. The trees were mostly still. The sound moved slowly, deliberately. I froze. My flashlight lay within reach, but I didn't want to move too much. I strained my ears, trying to figure out what it was. The rustling came closer, then paused. I could hear faint snapping of twigs under weight. I realized I hadn't seen any other campers, and the trail I had taken had been empty all day. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other wild animal passing through. That made my stomach twist even more. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous, but the sound was heavy, not like a deer, more like something large. I held my breath. The rustling moved again, circling around my tent. I could hear it stop and sniffing sounds, the faint brushing of branches against something solid. I was terrified, but I forced myself to think. I remembered the advice I'd read about bears and mountain lions. Stay quiet, make yourself big if confronted, never turn your back. I reached for my flashlight and quietly switched it on, pointing it toward the direction of the noise. There was nothing. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the trees, the underbrush, the faint outline of rocks, but nothing moved. I slowly panned the light, holding my breath. Then I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes reflecting the beam from about 20 feet away. I froze. It was low to the ground, close to the size of a large dog, but the shape was heavy, muscular. My mind immediately thought bear. I could see a dark outline behind the eyes, the faint movement as it sniffed the air. I stayed still, heart hammering, remembering all the precautions I'd read about encountering bears. Slowly, I reached for the small canister of bear spray I had brought. I didn't want to use it unless I had to, but I had to be ready. The animal moved again, and I could hear heavy breathing. It was circling the tent, coming closer to the area where I had left my backpack and food. My stomach sank. If it got inside my tent or my food, things could get dangerous very fast. I tried to think clearly. The rustling stopped again. The eyes stayed fixed on my flashlight beam for a long, terrifying moment. Then, suddenly, the creature bolted back into the trees with incredible speed, disappearing into the darkness. My body shook uncontrollably. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening to every sound, flashlight in hand, every muscle tense. I barely slept. By dawn, the forest was quiet again, and I could see sunlight filtering through the trees. I cautiously unzipped the tent, looking around. There were tracks near the edge of my campsite. They were massive, much larger than a human's. I traced them with my eyes, seeing the pattern of claws in the dirt and broken twigs. Whatever it had been, it was large, probably a bear, maybe an adult male. My mind replayed the night's events over and over, the fear still knotting my stomach. I decided I needed to leave immediately. I packed my tent and all my gear as quickly and quietly as possible, being careful not to make too much noise. I double-checked the trail before stepping onto it, looking around constantly. The forest felt different in daylight, less threatening, but still heavy with the memory of the night. I kept my eyes open for movement, scanning the trees and underbrush. I moved fast, not running, but not pausing for breaks. I had learned how quickly bears could cover ground, and I didn't want to take any chances. Hours later, I reached the river crossing I had planned to use for a break. I drank water and ate a granola bar, my hands still trembling slightly. The sun was higher now, warming my back and drying the sweat on my shirt. I thought about how close I had been to serious danger, and the thought made my heart race again. I promised myself I would never underestimate the wilderness again. When I finally reached the parking lot where I had left my car, I felt an incredible sense of relief. My legs were sore, my clothes damp and smudged with dirt, but I was alive and safe. I loaded my backpack into the car, locked the doors, and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, just breathing. The forest had been beautiful, but also unforgiving. That morning, I made a mental note. Next time, I would camp in areas known for safety, never go alone, and always keep a keen awareness of the wildlife around me. On the drive home, I kept thinking about the night, the glowing eyes, the rustling sounds that had made my blood run cold. I realized that nature was not a playground. It was unpredictable, wild, and serious mistakes could cost a lot. But I also realized I had survived, and that survival gave me a deep respect for the world beyond the city. The mountains, the trees, the river, they were alive and powerful, and I had glimpsed that power firsthand. I promised myself I would return one day, but only with more preparation, caution, and respect for the wilderness. I never forgot that night. Even years later, I would remember the sound of those heavy steps circling my tent, the eyes glowing in the dark, and the fear that had gripped me. But I also remembered the careful decisions I had made, staying calm under pressure, and how that had allowed me to leave safely. That experience changed the way I approached camping, hiking, and the outdoors. I learned that fear was not a weakness. It was a tool to stay alert, to survive, and to respect the world around me. I still camp, still hike in the mountains, but I do so with full awareness of the risks. I check the weather, I scout the area, I carry extra supplies, and I never assume I am alone in the wilderness. That night had taught me that life can change in a moment, that danger can appear without warning, and that preparation, caution, and respect can make the difference between life and death. I had faced fear directly and walked away alive, and that knowledge has stayed with me ever since, quietly shaping every trip, every hike, every night I spend under the stars. I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. The idea of disconnecting from everything, my phone, my job, the constant noise of the city, was irresistible. I wanted nothing more than to find a quiet spot deep in the forest, away from anyone else, and just spend a few days in complete isolation. I had my tent, a small stove, food for a week, water purification tablets, and a well-stocked first aid kit. I thought I was ready for anything the woods could throw at me. The first day went exactly as I had hoped. I parked my car at a small trailhead I had found on a map and followed the path for a few miles. The forest was dense, with thick pines that blocked most of the sunlight, and the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. Birds chirped above me, and I could hear the occasional rustle of squirrels or rabbits moving through the underbrush. I kept my pace steady, enjoying the solitude, occasionally stopping to examine a particularly interesting tree or to take a sip of water. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing near a stream. It wasn't large, but it was perfect for setting up a tent. The ground was flat, covered in soft pine needles, and the stream provided a constant trickle of fresh water. I set up my tent carefully, hammering the stakes deep into the soil, then unpacked my supplies and built a small fire pit a few feet away from the tent. The first night in the woods was calm. I cooked some pasta over the stove, ate slowly, and watched the fire flicker as darkness fell. I slept well, lulled by the sound of the stream and the forest around me. The next morning I woke early. Mist hung over the forest, clinging to the trees and the ground. I brewed coffee on my stove and sat by the stream, staring at the water as it moved over the rocks. I had a full day planned of exploring, but I didn't want to go too far from camp. I didn't want to get lost. After breakfast, I packed a small day pack with water, snacks, a flashlight, a compass, and a map, and started walking along a narrow trail that wound deeper into the forest. At first, the trail was easy to follow. I could see footprints from hikers and the occasional blaze painted on the trees. But after a while, the trail became less defined. Pine needles covered the path, and fallen branches blocked my way. I stepped carefully, trying to remember landmarks and keep track of my direction. I didn't want to wander too far from the stream, which I planned to use as a reference point. By mid-afternoon, I realized I had gone further than I intended. The forest was quiet in a way that was almost too quiet. No birds sang, no squirrels ran across the branches. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I paused to check my compass and map. I had been heading north along the trail, but now I could see that the trail had disappeared entirely. The map indicated that I was near a small ridge, but the trees were so dense I couldn't see anything clearly. I decided to turn back, retracing my steps. That's when I noticed something strange. I had walked along this path earlier without noticing any marks, but now there were fresh footprints in the soft soil. They weren't my own, and they weren't animal tracks, they were human. I froze and scanned the area. The tracks seemed to circle around, as if someone had been moving through the forest, watching. My heart began to race. I had expected isolation, but I hadn't expected to encounter anyone else. I considered shouting or making noise, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to alert anyone to my presence. The tracks were fresh, though probably only a few hours old. Whoever it was had been close by, maybe even following the same trail. I felt a wave of unease, but I told myself to stay calm. I wasn't in immediate danger, and the logical thing to do was to head back to my camp. I turned around slowly and started walking back. The forest felt different now, oppressive. The trees seemed closer, the shadows darker. Every snapped twig made me jump, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone. After a few minutes, I thought I heard something moving in the brush. A low rustle, like someone stepping over leaves. My heart pounded. I quickened my pace, trying to focus on the path back, but the rustling seemed to follow me, staying just out of sight. I came to a small clearing, and I could just make out the faint glimmer of the stream. Relief washed over me. I was close to camp. I picked up my pace, hoping to reach safety before whoever was out there decided to show themselves. Then I heard it, a sharp snap behind me, louder than a branch breaking naturally. I froze. The sound was deliberate, close, and fast. Someone was following me. I could hear their breathing now, uneven and shallow. I broke into a run, stumbling over roots and rocks, my heart hammering in my chest. The forest seemed endless, each turn revealing another tangle of trees and underbrush. The stream should have been on my right, but I lost track of it in my panic. I realized that I had no clear sense of direction. I was running blindly through the forest. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, I tripped over a root and fell hard onto the forest floor. Pain shot through my ankle, and I realized I had twisted it badly. I tried to stand, but my foot gave way. I was immobilized. Panic surged. I could hear movement now, closer than ever, breaking through the brush. Whoever it was had caught up. I crawled a few feet toward a large tree, hoping to make myself small and hidden. Then I saw a figure moving between the trees. They weren't running, they were moving deliberately, slowly scanning the area. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't notice me. My ankle throbbed painfully with every heartbeat, and I knew I couldn't run. The figure moved past my hiding spot, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. I could hear them muttering to themselves, low and indistinct, like they were talking to no one. After what felt like an eternity, they moved away, deeper into the forest. I waited another few minutes, not daring to move, until I was sure they were gone. My body shook from adrenaline and fear. I looked around and realized I had no choice. I couldn't stay there. I would have to crawl back toward the stream and my camp, even if it hurt. I started crawling, dragging myself over rocks and roots. Each movement sent sharp pain through my ankle, but I forced myself to keep going. Slowly, the sound of running water reached my ears. Relief surged. I followed it, moving as quickly as I could manage, and finally saw the stream glimmering through the trees. My camp was close. I could see my tent in the clearing, still standing, the fire pit cold from the day before. I crawled the final few feet and collapsed beside the tent, exhausted and shaking. My ankle was swollen and painful, but I was alive. I gathered my things as best I could, realizing I couldn't stay another night in the forest alone. I packed up quickly, leaving behind most of my gear except what I could carry. Using a makeshift splint from a branch and some cloth, I secured my ankle as best I could. It took hours, but I managed to limp back to my car, following the trail by retracing my steps and using the stream as a guide. Every sound in the forest made me flinch, every shadow made me pause, but I kept going. By nightfall, I finally reached the trailhead. The lights of my car were a sight I had never been happier to see. I collapsed in the driver's seat, trembling, pain shooting through my ankle, but relieved to be safe. Driving home was slow and agonizing. My ankle hurt with every movement, but I focused on the road. I called a friend to let them know what had happened, and they promised to meet me with ice and help when I got home. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure in the forest, the way they had followed me, and the terrifying realization that someone had been so close to me, watching. Once home, I went straight to the emergency room. The doctor confirmed I had a severe ankle sprain, possibly a small hairline fracture. I would need weeks of rest, crutches, and physical therapy. I also filed a report with the local authorities describing the trail, the footprints, and the general location where I had seen the figure. They assured me they would check the area, but it was unclear if they ever found anyone. The experience stayed with me for months. I couldn't sleep easily, and I constantly double-checked locks and doors. But over time, the fear became something more manageable, a reminder of the limits of solitude in the wild. I learned how careful one must be in the forest, how unpredictable nature and people can be. I never returned to that trail. Instead, I researched safer, well-populated camping areas where I could enjoy the outdoors without the constant anxiety of being alone in a remote forest. The experience changed the way I approached planning trips, safety, and the simple act of being aware of my surroundings. I realized that while solitude can be peaceful, it can also be dangerous if one isn't prepared for the unknown. I survived, but it was only because I stayed alert, calm, and determined to get back to safety, even when every instinct told me I couldn't. The forest still calls to me sometimes, in memories, in dreams, but now I approach it with caution, respect, and preparation. That trip, terrifying as it was, taught me how strong I could be in the face of fear, and how quickly things can turn from peaceful to dangerous when you least expect it. I had been planning this camping trip for weeks, and I wanted it to be completely alone. I needed that kind of isolation, the kind where the only sounds are the wind through the trees, the occasional bird, and the crunch of my own footsteps on the forest floor. I chose a remote area I had read about online, a section of wilderness several hours from the nearest town, where trails were barely marked and the forest felt untouched. I had a map, a compass, a tent, a sleeping bag, a stove, and enough food and water for several days. I was confident in my preparation. I thought I was ready for anything. The first day went as planned. I hiked along a narrow trail that wound through dense pine forests. The The smell of damp earth mixed with pine resin was strong and comforting. Birds called to each other from the treetops, and I felt that peaceful kind of solitude you can only find far from roads and houses. The sun was bright but low in the sky when I found a small clearing near a slow-moving stream. The ground was flat enough for a tent, and I decided this would be my campsite. I unpacked, set up my tent, and started a small fire with the dry branches I found nearby. By evening, the air had cooled, and the forest had changed completely. Birds were quiet now, and the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush sounded louder. I cooked some food over the fire and drank water from my bottle, careful to filter it properly. After finishing my meal, I sat for a while staring at the fire, feeling the kind of calm that comes from being alone in nature. I went to sleep early, exhausted from the hike, expecting to wake refreshed in the morning. I woke around midnight to the sound of movement outside the tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but the sound was different. It was deliberate, heavy, almost like someone was walking through the underbrush. My stomach tightened, and my hands felt cold even inside the sleeping bag. I held my flashlight and waited. The noise stopped. I listened for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. Eventually, I forced myself to calm down and drifted back to sleep, convincing myself it had been my imagination. Morning came slowly. The forest was quiet, the stream glinting in the sunlight. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling from the night before. I packed some gear and decided to explore a little further upstream, following the trail that disappeared into the trees. The undergrowth was thick, and my feet sank into wet leaves and mud with every step. After an hour, I found a small rock outcrop overlooking a bend in the stream. I sat there for a while, listening to the water, trying to remember why I loved camping so much. Then I noticed the tracks. They were faint at first, but there was no mistaking them. Human footprints in the mud, fresh, leading from the direction of my campsite into the forest. My heart rate jumped. I thought about how isolated I was, how far it was to any help. My mind raced through possibilities, hunters, hikers, maybe someone lost. But something about the tracks made me uneasy. They were irregular, like the person had been walking slowly, pausing, watching. I decided to head back to my tent, hoping whoever had passed through was gone. But when I reached the clearing, my fire was out, my supplies had been disturbed, and my tent flap was slightly open. Nothing was missing that I could see, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I packed my things quickly, deciding to move to a new campsite deeper into the forest. The day passed slowly, with a constant sense of unease. I kept hearing noises, snaps of branches, rustling in the bushes, but when I stopped to look, there was nothing. Shadows seemed longer than they should have been, and every once in a while, I thought I caught glimpses of movement just at the edge of my vision. I forced myself to stay calm, reminding myself that the forest had animals and wind that could create strange sounds. I found another clearing by a small ridge in the late afternoon. It was more sheltered than the first site, and I hoped the elevation would give me a better view of the surroundings. I set up my tent quickly and gathered firewood, trying to keep busy. I ate a small meal and filtered water from the stream nearby. By nightfall, the sense of isolation had grown heavier. The forest was darker here, the trees closer together, and the sounds sharper. Every time I heard a twig snap, my heart jumped. Around 11 p.m., I heard it again. A slow, deliberate crunching of leaves, moving closer. I sat perfectly still in my tent, trying to make out the sound. It circled the clearing. Something was moving around my campsite. I thought about shouting, but I knew it could be dangerous. Whoever it was could be armed, or worse, they might be watching to see how I reacted. My mind raced with survival scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. I remembered the small hatchet I had packed. I kept it under my sleeping bag, just in case. I gripped it tightly and waited. Hours passed. The sounds eventually faded. I didn't sleep much that night. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves made me jump, but I kept telling myself I needed to stay calm and alert. The next morning, I decided I needed to get out. The forest that had seemed beautiful and peaceful yesterday now felt like a trap. I planned to hike back to the main road I had crossed 2 days ago. I packed quickly, careful not to leave anything behind, and set off. The forest was disorienting. Trails were faint or non-existent, and I had to rely on my compass and memory. The stress made every small noise feel threatening. By mid-afternoon, the terrain grew rougher. The underbrush was thick, and I had to push branches out of the way, scratch my arms on thorns, and wade through muddy patches. I felt exhausted and dehydrated, but the thought of staying in the forest another night was unbearable. The tracks I had seen yesterday kept replaying in my mind. I kept checking behind me, paranoid that someone was following. The forest offered hiding spots everywhere, and the shadows between trees seemed to stretch unnaturally. Finally, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, I saw a break in the trees, a dirt road, barely visible but unmistakable. Relief flooded me. I ran toward it, my legs burning, my chest heaving. The road led to a small clearing, and beyond it, I could see the faint outline of a larger forest road. I followed it, hoping to find a car or a trailhead. Hours later, I reached a main logging road, where I found a parked truck. I waited until night fell, and then I started walking toward the nearest town, hoping someone would see me or that I could reach a phone. By the time I reached the town, I was sunburned, scratched, and exhausted. My supplies were mostly gone, my backpack torn, and my boots ruined from the muddy forest trails. I reported the incident to the authorities, explaining that someone had been following me and that I feared for my life. They searched the area, but found no one. The forest had swallowed the traces. In the days after, I recovered physically, but the memory of the forest stayed with me. I replayed every sound, every shadow, every step. I realized that the real danger wasn't supernatural, it was human, or at least it could have been. Being alone in a remote area left me completely exposed, and even careful preparation couldn't eliminate the risks entirely. I went back to camping later, but never alone again. I always made sure someone knew my route, checked in regularly, and chose places closer to roads and people. I never stopped loving the forest, but I learned to respect it in a way I hadn't before. Nature is unpredictable, but the people in it can be even more so. That trip taught me the hard truth. No amount of skill, preparation, or caution can fully protect you from the unknown in the wilderness, especially when the unknown is human. Even now, years later, when I walk into a forest alone, I feel the same tension in the back of my mind. I carry extra tools, make noise to alert wildlife, and anyone else to my presence, and I never let my guard down. The memory of that night is a constant reminder that the wilderness is beautiful, but can be dangerous in ways you don't always expect. You can respect it, prepare for it, even understand it, but there is no guarantee that you will ever be completely safe. I had been planning this solo camping trip for months, and by the time I finally arrived at the trailhead, I felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. It was late September, and the forest was starting to show its first hints of autumn. The leaves were turning colors, reds, oranges, and yellows, and a crisp chill hung in the air. I had chosen a spot deep in a national forest, one that was isolated, off the main trails, and rarely visited by anyone else. My goal was simple: spend 4 days alone in the wilderness, hiking, setting up camp, and testing my ability to survive and navigate on my own. I parked my car in a small gravel lot at the trailhead. The place was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I double-checked my pack, making sure I had my tent, sleeping bag, food, water, stove, map, compass, flashlight, and first aid kit. Everything was there. My boots crunched on the gravel as I started down the trail. The path was narrow and winding, flanked by tall trees that formed a thick canopy overhead. Sunlight filtered through in scattered beams, illuminating patches of moss and fallen leaves. The air smelled clean, earthy, and sharp, carrying the faint scent of wet leaves and pine. The first few miles were easy. I kept a steady pace, stopping occasionally to drink water or take a photo of something that caught my eye. A bright red mushroom, a fallen tree with moss crawling over it, a small stream gurgling over rocks. I had planned my route carefully. My goal was to reach a small clearing near a river by late afternoon. The map indicated the clearing as an ideal camping spot, far enough from any road or other people to ensure solitude, but close enough to a water source. By late afternoon, I arrived at the clearing. The river flowed quietly nearby, its surface reflecting the fading sun. I could hear the water gurgling over rocks and small rapids, a constant, soothing sound. I picked a flat area away from the riverbank to set up my tent. The ground was soft but firm, covered in fallen leaves. I pitched my tent, secured it with stakes, and set up my sleeping area inside. Everything felt perfect. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the forest in golden light. I gathered some firewood, enough to last the evening, and built a small fire pit. Night came fast. The temperature dropped quickly, as it often does in the forest during early fall. I cooked a simple meal over my portable stove: rice, beans, and canned vegetables. I ate slowly, savoring the peace and quiet around me. Once I finished, I sat near the fire for a while, watching the flames lick the darkness. That's when I first noticed it. A distant sound, faint at first, like twigs snapping. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound repeated in an irregular rhythm. Sometimes it would be closer, then farther away. I scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, but all I could see were trees and shadows. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a fox. I kept my fire going, reassuring myself that the light would keep any wildlife at a distance. I brushed it off, even though a small knot of unease formed in my stomach. I went to sleep later that night with my flashlight beside me, my backpack close, and my knife within reach. The next morning, I woke early to the sound of the river and the soft light filtering into my tent. I had slept fitfully, waking several times to the sound of twigs breaking outside. I decided to take a short hike upstream to explore before breakfast. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. I walked carefully along the uneven terrain, stepping over roots and fallen branches. After about an hour, I reached a bend in the river where the water widened into a shallow pool. It was beautiful, clear, and calm. I paused, crouching by the edge to refill my water bottle and wash my hands. On my way back, I noticed something strange. A faint trail of footprints in the soft mud by the riverbank. At first, I thought they were animal tracks, but as I got closer, I realized they were human. They were too large and deep to be a child, and they led in the direction of my campsite. A shiver ran down my spine. My first thought was that someone had passed by overnight. The area was supposed to be isolated, but clearly, someone else had been there. I followed the tracks cautiously, trying to determine if they were recent. The footprints were wet, still slightly muddy, and the edges had not yet hardened. They were recent. I returned to my campsite, heart racing slightly, and made sure everything was in order. I checked my backpack and tent. Nothing had been disturbed. Whoever had been nearby had left no sign besides the tracks. I debated whether to leave immediately, but I had come prepared for a multi-day trip, and I didn't want to abandon it out of fear. I decided to stay but remain alert. Throughout the day, the sounds continued. Branches snapping, faint rustling in the distance. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of movement beyond the trees, shadows moving just at the edge of visibility. I stayed close to the camp, keeping my fire ready. By evening, I could see the sun sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. The feeling of being watched had intensified. I kept my fire burning, building it higher than usual, and made sure my tent was zipped tightly. Around 11 p.m., I heard it clearly. Footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, breaking branches in a rhythm that matched a human stride. I froze, my heart hammering. The forest was otherwise silent except for the river. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the noise. Nothing, just trees and darkness. I whispered to myself that it was probably a deer or some other animal, but the sound of snapping sticks continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. I realized it wasn't just one person, it was multiple footsteps, moving around my camp. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, flashlight in hand, fire burning, listening to the sounds circling the campsite. Every now and then, I would see shadows between the trees, fleeting glimpses of movement. I thought of leaving immediately, but it was pitch dark, and I had no idea if I would encounter someone else in the forest. I decided to wait until first light. When morning came, I moved quickly. I packed everything efficiently, keeping my movements quiet but deliberate. I left the fire burning. It felt safer that way, a signal that someone was already here. I retraced my path along the trail, sticking close to the river for orientation. The forest seemed almost normal now, the sun shining through the leaves, birds calling, and the river bubbling as usual. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe someone was camping illegally nearby, maybe hunters, maybe someone who was just wandering through. As I followed the trail, I came across more footprints. They were larger now, deeper, and heading in the same direction I had come from. My pace quickened. I realized that whoever had been near my campsite had not left, at least not far behind me. Panic surged through me. I considered calling for help on my phone, but the signal was weak and unreliable in this part of the forest. I pushed onward, heart racing, trying to think logically. After a few miles, I reached a familiar landmark, a large fallen tree that I had passed on my way in. I stopped, crouched, and scanned the area. Nothing. I checked the footprints again. They had vanished. I exhaled slowly, though I didn't feel completely safe. I kept walking until I reached the main trail, the one marked on the map and occasionally used by other hikers. The forest seemed calmer here, more open, more predictable. I continued walking until I reached a ranger station. I was exhausted, covered in dirt and sweat, but I felt an immense sense of relief. I reported the footprints and what had happened to the rangers. They nodded and took my information seriously. They told me that sometimes hikers or hunters would wander in these isolated areas, and occasionally they would follow or approach other campers, intentionally or not. It was rare, but it happened. They advised me to stick to marked trails, camp in designated areas, and always have a way to signal for help. I left the forest that day, my nerves still raw but my mind clearer. In the car, I looked back at the trees in the distance, still vibrant in the late September sunlight. I felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a strange sense of triumph. I had survived the isolation, the fear, and the uncertainty. The experience had shaken me, but it also taught me the importance of preparation, awareness, and respect for the wilderness. In the weeks afterward, I analyzed everything. My supplies, my route, my timing. I realized that fear is not about ghosts or monsters. It's about vulnerability and the unknown. Being alone in the wilderness, surrounded by sounds that you cannot fully explain, is frightening precisely because it is real. There is no magic, no fantasy. Just nature, people, and your own mind trying to make sense of it all. Months later, I returned to the same forest, but this time I stayed on the marked trails, camped in official sites, and kept a clear schedule. I still felt the thrill of the wild, but with caution. I had faced the fear of the unknown, and I had learned how to navigate it. That experience, raw and terrifying as it was, became one of the most important lessons of my life. The forest is beautiful, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening, but with respect, preparation, and awareness, it is also a place where you can grow stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant. And so, while the memories of snapping branches and fleeting shadows linger, they no longer hold the power to terrify me. I survived, I learned, and I returned, not with fear, but with understanding. I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. My work had been draining, the city felt suffocating, and I needed space, silence, and the kind of loneliness that made you notice yourself again. I picked a spot in the mountains, far from any road or established trail, a place I had never been but had read about in a few obscure hiking blogs. It was supposed to be remote, rugged, and untouched, the kind of place where you could feel the world shrink down to just the forest, the sky, and yourself. I drove most of the day, the sun high and bright, slicing through the pine trees as I wound my way up narrow dirt roads. The air grew cooler with elevation, and by the time I parked near a dry creek bed, the sun was lowering toward the horizon. I unloaded my pack, heavier than I liked, but necessary. Tent, sleeping bag, stove, water, food for 3 days, extra layers in case of cold nights, a first aid kit, and my emergency gear. I triple-checked the basics, making sure my phone was fully charged, the power bank full, and my flashlight had fresh batteries. The trail I picked wasn't marked clearly. There were faint footprints and broken branches, but nothing consistent. I carried a map and compass, of course, but I liked to challenge myself. Hiking off the beaten path gave a strange thrill, a sense of control over your environment that you didn't get on crowded trails. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing on the side of a hill, surrounded by pines, firs, and a scattering of oak. The ground was uneven, littered with pine needles, broken twigs, and patches of moss. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for my tent. I set it up quickly, staking it into the soft soil, making sure it was level. The sun was dipping behind the ridges, leaving the forest in a golden haze. I brewed tea on my small stove, sat on a flat rock, and watched the wind move the treetops. Birds were quieting, and the distant rustle of animals moving through underbrush sounded normal, comforting even. Night came faster than I expected. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and listened. At first, it was just the normal forest sounds. Insects chirping, leaves brushing together, the occasional snap of a branch. I wasn't afraid yet. Not really. Felt peaceful. Then, after an hour or so, I heard it. A faint sound at first, like a footstep on loose dirt. I froze, listening. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was rhythmic, slow, deliberate, not like an animal. Animals didn't step this carefully, not when the forest was so quiet. I didn't move, trying to convince myself it was a deer or some other creature. But the steps grew closer, circling my tent in a way that didn't feel natural. I checked my phone. Signal was weak, but I had enough to see the time. 11:43 p.m. I reached for my flashlight, keeping as still as I could, and unzipped the tent flap just a crack. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but all I could see were trees. Nothing else. I tried to calm myself. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the wind had shifted, and something had fallen in the underbrush. I went back to my sleeping bag and tried to sleep, but every creak, every rustle, every snap of a twig had my heart jumping. Around midnight, I heard it again, louder this time, a deliberate crunch of soil, as if someone was wearing heavy boots, moving carefully but close. I unzipped the tent fully, flashlight in hand, trying to peer into the darkness. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I remembered I had packed my knife and flashlight together in an easily reachable spot. I gripped the knife tightly, knowing it was almost useless against a human, but still better than nothing. The sound moved to the opposite side of the clearing. I could see the shadows of movement between the trees. Whoever it was, they were close, and they were moving slowly, deliberately, as if they knew I was there. Panic started creeping in, but I forced myself to think. There was a way out. I could wait until they moved on, but if they were just circling, I might be trapped until sunrise. I decided to act. I packed my essentials quickly, leaving food and stove behind, and slung my backpack over my shoulders. I didn't want to run blindly into the dark. I waited for the sound of footsteps to be on the far side of the clearing, then moved. I kept low, using the shadows of trees as cover, slipping quietly over moss and leaves. Every step felt like it echoed. Every crack of a twig underfoot made me freeze and hold my breath. Then I heard a shout. Not a scream, not a yell, but a deliberate bark of a voice. My blood ran cold. Whoever it was knew I was moving. I pushed myself faster, keeping the trees between us. I didn't have a destination, just away from the tent, away from the immediate clearing. I remembered seeing a faint path near a ridge when I first arrived. It would lead back to a wider trail, maybe even the road. I aimed for it. I ran blindly through the forest, tripping over roots, scraping my arms and legs on branches, my flashlight swinging wildly in my hand. The sound of movement followed me, but now it was erratic, not as coordinated. Whoever it was trying to keep up. Fear gave me strength I didn't know I had. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I thought I couldn't take another step. Finally, I stumbled onto a faint trail. The moonlight was weak, but it was enough to guide me. I kept running, staying on the trail, the sound of footsteps fading behind me. The forest was alive with night sounds, but they weren't threatening anymore. My mind was focused entirely on survival, on putting as much distance as I could between myself and whoever had been circling my campsite. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, I saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance. I ran toward it, waving my flashlight frantically. The road appeared, narrow and winding, but unmistakable. I didn't care that it was late, that the driver might think I was crazy. I flagged down the first car that approached. The driver looked startled, but when I explained in hurried, breathless words that I had been followed in the forest and needed to get to safety, they didn't hesitate. I got in, and as we drove away, I glanced back toward the dark line of trees. The forest seemed calm again, quiet as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The next morning, authorities escorted me back to my campsite. They searched the area thoroughly but found nothing. No tracks, no evidence of anyone having been there, nothing but my abandoned gear. They suggested maybe someone had been scouting hunters or campers passing through illegally, but nothing concrete. Whatever it was, whoever it was, they had disappeared without a trace. I left most of my gear behind and didn't return. The experience stayed with me, though, every time I went into the woods. I had learned to respect the solitude I sought, but also to respect the danger that can hide in that same silence. I had survived because I stayed calm, moved deliberately, and trusted my instincts. The fear didn't fade quickly. I still think about the footsteps circling my tent, the way the shadows moved between the trees, the way my own heartbeat sounded loud and heavy in the night. Months later, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a lost hiker. Maybe a hunter had been in the area illegally. Maybe it was just my mind exaggerating things. But I knew what I heard, what I felt, the deliberate, cautious movements of someone who had been there, watching, waiting. I didn't return to that mountain. I didn't need to. The forest would always be there, quiet and beautiful and dangerous. And I had learned a lesson I would never forget. Some parts of the wilderness are best admired from a distance, with caution, and with your senses fully alert. I kept camping, but always in well-known, populated areas. I carried more emergency gear, always told someone where I would be, and stayed alert. I never let fear dominate my life, but I never forgot it either. The forest had shown me its dark side, and I had walked away alive. That clarity, that survival became part of me. I knew now that danger could come quietly, invisibly, and that sometimes the scariest things weren't supernatural. They were human, patient, and observant. And that night, alone in the forest, I had survived. I had been driving for hours along winding forest roads, the kind that seemed to disappear into endless stretches of dense trees. The cabin I rented was deep in the woods, far from any town, and I was determined to have a weekend of solitude. The sky was a dull gray as I pulled into a small clearing where the cabin stood. It was old but sturdy, made of thick logs with a stone chimney, and the surrounding forest pressed in close, the trees almost forming a wall around the clearing. The air was heavy with damp earth and pine, and I felt a strange mix of relief and unease as I stepped out of the car. The isolation was exactly what I wanted, but there was something about the silence here that made it feel different from any other forest I had been in. I dragged my bags across the uneven ground, hearing the crunch of fallen leaves and twigs beneath my boots. The cabin's door was slightly warped from years of weather, but it opened with a hard pull. Inside, the place smelled of old wood and dust, with faint traces of smoke from the fireplace. The windows were grimy, letting in only muted light, and the furniture was sparse and rough-hewn. A single bed, a table, a few chairs, and a small kitchen area filled the space. I set my bags down and walked slowly through the cabin, running my fingers over the wooden surfaces. It felt empty, untouched for a while, but not abandoned. I told myself it was just how these old cabins were, and tried to shake off the tight feeling in my chest. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the branches in a way that made the shadows in the clearing move like they were alive. I spent the afternoon gathering firewood, stacking it neatly near the fireplace, and checking the cabin's supplies. There was a small pile of split logs outside, and a box of kindling. The cabin had running water, but the faucet rattled and sometimes sputtered air instead of water. Electricity was limited to a few wall outlets and a single overhead light, which flickered when I turned it on. I shrugged and accepted it. Part of the experience was living without all the comforts of modern life. As the day turned to evening, I built a fire in the fireplace. The logs snapped and hissed as flames licked upward, casting a warm glow across the rough wooden walls. I made a simple dinner, canned beans and bread, and ate slowly, listening to the wind as it pushed through the trees. The forest had its own sounds. Distant birds calling, the occasional rustle of leaves, the creak of branches under their own weight. I felt a creeping awareness that I wasn't alone out here, not in the literal sense, but in the way the forest seemed to hold its breath and watch me. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just the unfamiliar environment. Night came quickly. I extinguished the overhead light and sat by the fire, letting its warmth and glow fill the cabin. Outside, the wind had grown colder, and I heard something that made me freeze. A low, rhythmic thump. At first, I thought it was a branch falling, but then I realized it wasn't random. It was deliberate, steady, and moving closer. My stomach tightened. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound had a weight to it, like something larger, heavier, moving through the underbrush. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped to the doorway. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing in front of the cabin. The forest was still, nothing moving. The thump had stopped. I held my breath, scanning the edge of the clearing. The trees were black shapes against the night sky, and I felt a sudden chill as I realized how deep into the woods I was. My mind tried to reason through it. No roads, no neighbors for miles. If there was someone out here, they had to have planned this. I went back inside, locking the door and windows as best I could. My fire had died down to embers, and I added more wood, letting the flames roar back to life. I sat close, my back against the wall, listening. Hours passed. The wind howled outside, making the cabin shudder. I kept hearing the sound of footsteps, or maybe something heavier, moving around the perimeter of the cabin. Every creak of the floorboards, every crack of a branch, made me tense. I tried to distract myself by reading a small book I had brought, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows. Around midnight, I heard it again. A slow, deliberate pounding, not on the door this time, but coming from somewhere outside. It wasn't animal. I knew that sound. My heart raced as I realized it could be a human. I didn't panic, not yet. I thought through my options. There was a phone, but service was weak here. I had my car keys, a small camping knife, and a hatchet I kept by the fire for splitting logs. I wasn't armed beyond that. I stayed low, crouched near the fireplace, and waited, trying to listen and figure out the direction of the sound. The pounding stopped again. The silence afterward was worse, almost unbearable. I could hear my own breathing. Then a different noise, a soft scraping, like someone dragging something across the ground, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. I realized with a sinking feeling that whoever or whatever was out there, they were circling the cabin, examining it, probing it. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that panicking would make me careless. I waited hours like that, fire dimming, embers glowing red in the dark. Around 3 a.m., the sound changed. There was a sudden, violent crash, followed by the sound of splintering wood. I grabbed the hatchet and flashlight and went to the door. One of the side windows had been smashed. I saw the outlines of trees outside and nothing else. Whoever had been circling the cabin was gone, at least for now. My hands shook as I reinforced the window with a chair and a log from the fire. I didn't sleep. I stayed close to the fireplace, keeping the embers alive, gripping my knife. Morning came slowly. The wind had died down, leaving the forest quiet, almost unnaturally still. I peered out the windows. There were footprints around the cabin, large and uneven, and marks on the ground where branches had been pushed aside. I could see where someone had smashed the window, leaving glass shards scattered on the ground. Panic mixed with relief. I had survived the night, but the memory of those sounds, the feeling of being watched, stayed with me. I decided to leave immediately. I packed my things as quickly and quietly as I could, checking the perimeter for anyone hiding in the woods. I got in my car and started the engine, hands trembling, eyes scanning the tree line. The forest looked peaceful in the daylight, almost normal, but I knew what had happened. Someone had been watching, and they knew I was alone. The drive back to civilization felt endless. Every noise from the car, every movement in the corner of my eye, set me on edge. When I finally reached a gas station in the nearest town, I stopped and got out, looking around at the streetlights, the other cars, the people moving around. The normalcy was jarring. I realized I had been holding my breath for hours without noticing. I called the local sheriff to report the incident, describing the footprints, the smashed window, everything I had seen. They took a report and said they would send someone to check the cabin, but I knew there was little they could do. The forest was vast, and whoever had been there could disappear before anyone arrived. I never went back to that cabin. The experience stayed with me for months. I found myself double-checking locks at home, jumping at small noises, replaying the night over and over in my mind. I learned to respect the isolation of the forest in a way I hadn't before. Solitude is peaceful when it's safe, but out there, far from anyone, it can be dangerous in ways you don't expect. The thought of someone walking around your home, or any place you think is safe, without your knowledge is something that doesn't leave you easily. Eventually, I found other ways to enjoy nature. Short hikes during the day, camping in areas with more people around. I learned to trust my instincts and to prepare for the unexpected. That night in the cabin taught me a lesson I would never forget. Being alone in the wilderness isn't just about being surrounded by trees and wildlife. It's about the vulnerability of being completely exposed with no one to rely on. And even when you survive, the memory of being watched, of feeling utterly alone and threatened, lingers longer than the night itself. I had always loved camping alone. The idea of being deep in the forest, away from the noise of the city, feeling completely disconnected from everything, was something I craved. That summer, I decided to explore a stretch of wilderness I had never visited before. The forest was known for its dense trees, rocky terrain, and a lake that few people ever reached. I wanted that kind of isolation, just me, my gear, and the forest. I drove for hours on narrow roads that twisted through hills and valleys. The sun was low in the sky by the time I parked on the gravel pull-off, leaving my car behind. From there, a narrow trail led into the woods. The path was uneven, overgrown in some places, and marked only by occasional faded signs nailed to trees. My backpack felt heavy on my shoulders, but I welcomed the strain. The quiet was immediate. The chirping of birds and rustle of small animals in the underbrush replaced the hum of engines and distant traffic. I hiked until I found a clearing I thought would be perfect for my camp. It was close to the lake, though not too close. The ground was flat, and there were enough trees to give me some shelter from the wind. I set up my tent as the last rays of sun slipped below the treeline. I used a small, portable stove to cook my dinner, a simple mix of rice, beans, and canned vegetables. The smell of food carried into the forest, mingling with the damp scent of soil and pine. I ate quickly, aware that darkness was falling faster than I had expected. The lake reflected the fading light, its surface perfectly still. Everything seemed peaceful. I felt a deep satisfaction, a rare calm that only comes from being completely alone in nature. After cleaning up, I sat by a small fire I had managed to start using dry sticks I had collected. I watched the flames, letting the warmth chase away the chill that had begun to creep in as night approached. The sky darkened, and stars started to appear, countless points of light that seemed impossibly bright compared to the dim city glow I was used to. I felt a deep sense of freedom, of being completely untethered. Then I heard the first sound. A soft crack like a stick breaking under weight. My stomach tightened. I wasn't sure if it was an animal or another person, but the sound was close. I froze, listening carefully. The forest was alive with small noises, rustling leaves, the occasional call of a distant owl. But this sound was distinct, deliberate. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or maybe a raccoon. I had a small flashlight and I swept it over the area around my camp. Nothing moved. Still, the feeling of being watched settled over me like a cold cloak. I went back to my fire, telling myself that the forest was full of sounds and that I was probably imagining things. The fire's warmth was comforting, and I tried to focus on its crackling. Minutes passed, and I relaxed a little. Then I heard it again. Another snap, this time closer, right at the edge of the clearing. My heart raced. I had read about attacks on solo campers, though they were rare, but the thought of someone else in these woods at night made my skin crawl. I grabbed a small hunting knife I carried for emergencies and kept it within reach. The flashlight beam swept the perimeter of the clearing, but the darkness beyond was thick and unyielding. The sound of footsteps continued intermittently. Each time, they seemed to get a little closer, circling the camp. I tried to stay calm, remembering my training from wilderness survival guides I had read. Noise could be a deterrent, so I slammed a piece of firewood against the ground, hoping to scare away whatever it was. The footsteps paused. Silence fell. I stayed frozen, listening. Then the sound resumed, this time coming from the direction of the lake. I caught a glimpse of movement, something or someone moving just beyond the treeline. My heart pounded in my chest. I could see the faint outline of a person, hunched slightly, moving slowly and deliberately. The flashlight caught the reflection of something metallic in their hand. A flashlight, I realized, but pointed away from me. Whoever it was hadn't seen me yet. Panic set in. I couldn't just sit there. I had options. I could try to leave quietly, or I could stay and hope they passed. I chose to stay, reasoning that leaving might put me in an even more exposed position along the narrow trail. I crouched low behind a small bush, keeping the fire between us as a shield. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the edge of the clearing. I could hear the faint swish of their clothing and the soft crunch of leaves under their boots. Every instinct told me I was in danger. I tightened my grip on the knife, silently wishing I had my rifle, but I had left it at home for what I thought would be a peaceful solo trip. Time stretched. I held my breath, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the shadowy figure. Then I saw them pause and crouch, as if inspecting something near the ground. My mind raced. Were they after my supplies? Did they know I was here? I had taken precautions. My food was packed away, my backpack zipped tightly. I realized I needed a plan in case they came closer. I slowly reached for my backpack and pulled out my extra flashlight. I pointed it directly at the figure and switched it on, hoping the sudden burst of light would startle them. It did. The figure jerked upright, turned abruptly, and ran back toward the trail leading deeper into the forest. Relief washed over me, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I quickly extinguished my fire, stuffed the remaining wood into my backpack, and grabbed my gear. Moving as quietly as I could, I retraced my steps along the trail I had used to enter the forest. Darkness enveloped me, but I kept the flashlight ready, scanning for any sign of movement. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this a hunter, someone lost, or something worse? Couldn't tell. I focused only on putting distance between myself and the clearing. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 30 minutes, I reached a small rise that offered a view of the trail below. I paused, chest heaving, and saw no sign of the figure. I continued along the trail, keeping my pace steady but quiet. Eventually, I reached the road where I had parked my car. The lights of my vehicle were a relief, a beacon of safety in the overwhelming darkness. I didn't stop to catch my breath until I was inside, doors locked, engine running. I drove slowly at first, scanning the tree line for movement, before finally accelerating toward the nearest town. The next morning, I returned to the authorities to report the incident. They noted the area was remote and warned that hikers had occasionally encountered illegal activity. Campers being followed, people poaching wildlife, and occasional break-ins on vehicles parked at trailheads. My encounter had been terrifying, but it wasn't supernatural. It was real. Someone had been there, someone potentially dangerous. I had survived by staying calm, using the tools I had, and making the decision to retreat rather than confront. The memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder of how easily isolation could turn dangerous. In the weeks that followed, I returned to camping, but only to well-trafficked areas. I learned to take extra precautions, leaving my itinerary with someone, carrying more reliable lighting, and ensuring my phone had signal. The experience had changed my perception of wilderness solitude. It wasn't the calm isolation I had romanticized. It was a place of real danger if one was careless. I still loved the forest, but I understood it differently now. A place of beauty, yes, but also a place that demanded vigilance, awareness, and respect for its hidden threats. I never forgot the cold, creeping fear of being watched and the relief of making it out safely. It shaped the way I approached every solo trip afterward, always prepared, always alert, and always aware that the wilderness could be as unforgiving as it was breathtaking. I had been planning the trip for months, reading maps, checking weather reports, and gathering all the supplies I thought I would need. I had chosen a section of forest a few hours away from the nearest town, a stretch of wilderness that was popular for day hikers but rarely used for overnight camping. The idea was to have solitude, to escape the noise and the constant pull of technology. I imagined sitting by a small fire, staring at the stars, breathing the forest air, and falling asleep to the sound of wind in the trees. I never imagined how wrong everything could go. I arrived late in the afternoon, carrying my pack and a small tent I had recently bought. The trail was narrow and winding, and the forest around me was dense, the trees tall enough that sunlight only flickered through the canopy in small patches. I chose a flat spot near a shallow creek, a place I had passed on the way in, thinking it would be perfect for water and for the sound of flowing water to help me sleep. I unpacked my things, laid down a ground sheet, and set up the tent. I checked my backpack twice: food, water, matches, flashlight, first aid kit, knife, extra clothes. Everything seemed ready. The first part of the night was calm. I gathered wood and started a small fire. I cooked a simple meal, canned beans and a few slices of bread, and ate while the sun disappeared completely, leaving the forest in darkness except for the glow of the fire. The sounds of the forest grew stronger as night fell. The rustle of small animals, the distant cry of an owl, the occasional snap of a branch. I reminded myself that everything I heard was normal, part of being in the wild. Around 11 p.m., I began to notice something that made my stomach tighten. There were sounds that didn't quite belong to the usual forest night. Heavy footsteps on leaves, the sort that were too loud and irregular to belong to a small animal. They were soft at first, almost inaudible, then closer, as if someone or something was moving just outside the ring of my firelight. I froze, listening, straining to hear over my own heartbeat. The fire crackled, throwing shadows against the trees, and for a long time, there was only silence again. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, probably a deer or a raccoon. I checked my flashlight, and for a moment, I thought about leaving the fire and walking back to the car, but the thought of wandering in the dark, unprepared, made me decide to stay put. I rolled up tighter in my jacket and waited, every sound amplified in the quiet forest. The footsteps returned, this time from a different direction, circling the creek. My mind raced, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. Someone lost in the woods, a hunter who had wandered off the main trail, a person with bad intentions. I wanted to act rationally, to remind myself that people rarely came out here at night, that the nearest road was miles away. I tried to focus on the fire, poking at it, forcing my mind onto something else. I told myself I had done everything right. My tent was secure, my food was packed away safely, and I had my knife close. I checked the creek, making sure there was nothing in the water, and every time the wind shifted, I caught a glimpse of a shadow, something moving just beyond the trees. Then I realized my mistake. I had left some food scraps near the fire, careless, and the smell had carried. There was a rustling now louder, accompanied by the smell of wet earth and a faint, pungent odor that made my stomach turn. I scanned the perimeter with the flashlight, shining it in every direction. The beam caught a shape moving between the trees, a silhouette that stopped when I moved the light toward it. My heart raced. It wasn't small, it was bigger than a deer. I considered packing up and leaving immediately, but the thought of moving through the forest in the dark with that thing nearby seemed worse than staying put. I retreated into the tent, unzipping it only slightly to look out. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, but it was different now, heavy and watchful. I could hear my own breathing, the pounding of my heart, and the creek flowing nearby. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours, I could not tell. Then, a sharp crack broke the stillness, the sound of a branch breaking under weight. I froze, every nerve alert. The fire had died down a little, and I could see the shape now, clear in the shadows outside the trees. I could not tell exactly what it was, but it moved with a strange, deliberate motion. It was big, and it was coming closer. I remembered the emergency whistle in my pack. I gripped it tightly and thought about blowing it, but I realized that doing so would give away my exact position. I had no idea what was out there, human or animal, and every instinct told me that sudden noise might provoke it rather than scare it away. I crawled toward the corner of the tent, keeping my knife in hand, and waited. My plan was to stay as quiet as possible, stay low, and hope it left. Then the smell hit again, stronger, metallic, like blood or raw meat. My stomach churned, but I held still. The shape moved again, slow but sure, passing just outside the line of the firelight. It paused near my food scraps, sniffing, investigating, and I realized it was likely a wild animal, a bear. My stomach dropped. This was no ordinary bear. It was large, probably an adult male, and it was very close. Every story I had read about bear encounters in the wild came flooding back. Do not run, do not scream, do not make sudden movements. My hands shook as I tightened my grip on the knife, though I knew it was useless against a creature of that size. I remembered the bear spray in my pack. Slowly, carefully, I reached for it without making noise. My plan was to wait until it came too close, then use the spray if necessary. But the bear had other ideas. It pawed at the ground near the food, then sniffed the air in my direction. I could see its shape clearly now, black fur blending with the darkness, eyes glinting from the firelight. It made a low growl, not loud but enough to vibrate through the ground. My heart seemed to stop. Time slowed. Every sound was magnified. The creek, the wind, the rustling of leaves. It all became a part of the tension. I remembered the advice from wilderness guides. Remain calm, make yourself look bigger, slowly back away. But I was trapped in my tent. The bear sniffed closer, now on the edge of the firelight. I could see its claws, the powerful limbs, the weight pressing down on the forest floor. I counted in my head, slow and deliberate, trying to keep calm. Then the fire popped loudly, the flame catching a small piece of dry wood and sending a spark into the air. The bear flinched, startled. I realized that my fire, small as it was my protection. I grabbed a stick, fed it into the fire, and the flames grew a little larger. The bear stepped back, shaking its head, then retreated a few meters into the shadows. My entire body trembled with adrenaline, but I stayed inside the tent, waiting. Minutes passed before I heard the crunching of leaves fading, signaling the bear was moving away. I waited for what felt like hours before daring to peek outside. The bear was gone. The forest returned to its normal sounds, the small noises of nocturnal life, the gentle flow of the creek. I did not sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the fire, flashlight in hand, rotating my view constantly, scanning the darkness. Dawn seemed to take forever to arrive. When the sun finally broke through the trees, I packed everything up quickly, checking twice that nothing was left behind. I moved slowly, staying alert, scanning for any signs of the bear. The walk back to the car was tense, every snap of a branch making me flinch. I kept to the trail, my eyes constantly moving, ready for any sudden movement. By the time I reached the parking area, exhausted and shaken, I realized how lucky I had been. I had survived the night without injury, had kept calm, had used my wits and my knowledge of wilderness safety. I thought about what I had learned. Respect for the forest, the unpredictability of wildlife, the importance of preparation. I drove home slowly, replaying the events in my mind, grateful for the experience but relieved to be out of the forest. I knew I would camp again, but I would do so differently, more cautiously, more aware, and never underestimating the power of the wild. That night stayed with me for years, a reminder that sometimes survival depends not on luck alone, but on preparation, patience, and calm under pressure. The fear I felt was real, but it had also taught me a respect for life, both human and animal, that I would carry forever.